Good morning. Don't know who we have here, Erica. I'm just trying to get this infernal microphone set up. I'm not built for this. Good morning, doom scrollers. Oh, it's a exceptionally peaceful day here in Perth, Western Australia. It's overcast, and I've started something yesterday again, not for the first time, and I wanted to pop onto Substack just to keep some momentum going, even if only for myself. I don't exactly know what I want to talk about, but I'd like to keep the momentum going of a conversation I began yesterday. Erica, won't you just let me know if the audio is coming through? Okay. Yesterday I was talking about the dire need for a different quality of conversation that we're, I think, more ready for, that certainly hasn't been happening and is certainly not typical of what's going on online. Man, if I look at what's happening online, not much has changed, but there is a bit of a signal change. There's still, given where we are in our collective history, if we look back at our moment now, maybe in 100 or 1,000 years, and people consider where we are, it will be amazing. And I think this is possibly true for many calamities. It will be amazing how distracted or apathetic or kind of cavalier we're acting as we lurch towards what is going to be one of the most profound changes in to human beings and what we think is normal, etc. That humans have experienced, probably, I think it's fair to say, ever. There's been many changes in history that happened, but they happened, and when I say many changes, I mean what we're about to go through as a species here now, if this isn't evident to you already, is a magnitude of change, like a kind of shift or a pivot that isn't unlike the enormity of the revolution that happened in the psyche and the way people do things, as the agrarian pivot was. For a while, a long while, the longest while, our entire human history consisted of people in nomadic groups meandering around. Some of them eventually became herders, at least, and they would herd their animals along with them on their migratory arcs. And eventually they settled down into agrarian communities. Now, that change would have taken thousands of years. Okay, so it's not as if you arrived, you got plucked out of your life and somebody teleported you 200 years into the future and then plonked you down in there. Nothing visibly would have changed. Nothing visibly would have changed. But we've had other such pivots, like the Industrial Revolution and the Internet age. If you take somebody pre-Internet age and you give them that 20-year distance or difference, and you inject them back into the workforce, almost nothing is recognizable. Everything is changed in such a profound way. So many things are integrated into these devices, for example. So that was another enormous change, was the internet change happened, and the social media age came, and the smartphone age. And these technologies all converged to make life utterly unrecognizable today as to what it would have been sort of 30, 40 years ago. And there's so many rapid changes coming for us now, not the least of which is going to be a form of climate change. And we're still having the wrong kind of argument. Some people are still saying climate change is a political hoax. And some people have been confused by all the chatter, to the point that they keep hearing these other signals in the field that say something like, we don't even know if climate change is human caused. Climate has always been changed, and climate is always changing. Yes, but our entire economy, supply chain, world order, electricity production, food production, etc., is predicated on a certain band of normal. And if that band of normal changes too much, there is an enormous amount that we rely on that's going to change enormously. And we're not prepared for that quality of change. And our biggest challenge, just with the climate change, is there are things we're going to have to do remedially just to cope as societies. And there's things we're going to have to do remedially to try and stem some of the worst of our behaviors that are exacerbating these changes, right? That's a fact. And we can't have conversations at any level, not at a national level, not in our families, not online, because everything devolves, every single opinion or fact or observation diametrically opposed observations or takes on everything. So what we've got is a polycrisis. My internet connection is unstable, I'm being told by this infernal device. So what we have is a polycrisis that's emerging, and there is a meta-crisis on top of that. And the meta-crisis is that us that have to navigate this polycrisis are not equal to that task, and we're not even aware of the nature of the polycrisis. When lots of things happen together at once, they have a compounding effect. And we are incapable as a species, as it stands now. We are currently, as a whole group, however we like to divide ourselves up, our fate is going to be contingent on the behavior and the responses of each other, right? We are going to affect our own outcomes and affect each other's outcomes and how we respond now to this change that's coming. And as a group, we are incapable of having the necessary conversations, of collaborating meaningfully towards any kind of coherence, towards any kind of what I would call necessity, right? In any situation, there's what I believe is right. There's what we can't converge on necessity because we're so distracted, we're so ideologically captured, we're so cynical, and we didn't get to our mistrusts dishonestly. There's a reason we distrust or mistrust people of a certain political stripe. We have good reason for it. We didn't get here dishonestly. And one of the most core and foundational mistrusts is drawn along this dividing line of the sexes, the masculine feminine wound, right? The amount of confusion that we have, the amount of radioactivity surrounding this conversation, we can't even have serious conversations about what necessary looks like. When human beings have such an egregious wound to their psyche that is so fundamental, like our incoherence, and you're unable to speak into that space where you can open that wound and have a serious conversation about what its care looks like. Our inability to do that is one of those those core sort of root causes at the heart of our social dysfunction. And what I'm trying to do here is kick off and lead and participate in a conversation where we're able to speak about such things. I don't have a single talk track. The talk track is, let's have an elevated conversation. And it's not just that we want to do more talking. The aim of this conversation that I want to participate in and lead to my ability, but other leaders are going to have to arrive. We're going to need civic philosophers. We're going to need people with ideas. We're going to need thought leaders, right? But they're going to have to be aligned to this project of considering what is most necessary and changing the quality of our engagement, changing the quality of our conversation. We can't go out and change things en masse. But that doesn't mean that human beings are not now responsible for standing up. Nice to have you here, Carol. It does not mean that human beings are now responsible for standing up and finding a way forward, because that is what necessity looks like. We can no longer rely. If we're not understanding this already, this understanding is going to keep dawning and keep percolating up through the collective conscious. that we cannot rely on messianic billionaires. We cannot rely on politicians, even if they are well-meaning, even if, for the most part, they're not, even if they are well-meaning, even if the celebrity guru or the celebrity billionaire or the celebrity intellectual, even if they are well-meaning, which so many of them are not, even if they are well-meaning, the space in which they are operating, the structure that they operate from, what they think the levers of machination are broken, and they belong to a world order that is collapsing, and people are starting to wake up to that and starting to realize how dysfunctional that all is, right? Among the last people to realize that will be the empowered voices with large platforms and large microphones and large podiums. They will be among the last to realize that that way of engaging with people and solving problems is fundamentally broken. So the obvious question is, what can people, human beings at grassroots level do? What can we do? That is a question that's percolating up in the collective conscious at the moment. You'll see it in a lot of ways. You'll see it come out as anger. People are saying things like, I'm sick and tired of all the talk. It's just talk, talk, talk. We now need to do something. So there's a double-edged sword with that impulse. Because the default primitive human reaction, right, is to catharsis, it's to violence, it's to anarchy, it's to just fucking tear it all down. Good, I'm glad. Okay, but I love the energy, guys, but we are not thinking about what the consequences are for the most vulnerable among us. I am vulnerable, right? I've got a wife and a child. I cannot afford really for society to just rip itself down and let's see what happens. And the biggest concern with that impulse is we don't have a plan for what to do next, right? And I'm sure I can't be the first one to have said this. There'll be stories, there'll be examples in our stories and in our movies of people that just crack the shits with everything and then just rip everything down, and then they sit in the rubble now, and then only then do they realize what they lost, right? I'm not saying there are right or only ways. I'm not saying you have to try and get out the polishing cloth to tackle something that needs a hammer and a chisel. I'm saying what we need now is maturity, that kind of wisdom. And maturity is the wisdom of necessity. We have to do what is most necessary, and we have to do what is most necessary for humans. Now, not everybody can participate in this quality or this level of conversation yet. Some people are going to need to be led, younger people and people who are more distracted and more vulnerable. And some people are just not ready for this conversation. They're not ready psychologically. They're not ready in a maturity level. They're not ready emotionally. You can't change that. We cannot change that. We're an enormous population distribution, and the people that you can relate to and reach are the ones that have a similar degree of consciousness and alignment to you. And as you can tell from when any news item happens, Palestinians invade Israel and capture women and children and rape and burn and then take them away. And within moments, we're celebrating or blaming Jews for their oppression. We can't even isolate a moment and say, that's an egregious human act. Surely that deserves our scorn. And then the way that Israel responds, now there's a lot of confusion all around that. We've literally got confusion around every single major headline that happens. Not a single thing can happen where the left will argue about one version of it and the right will argue about another version of it, and there's no convergence on those two versions. Right, and we're so unrealistic in these conversations. For example, when Israelis are harming Muslims in Gaza, the world fucking freaks out, as they should, right? And then when Iranians murder 20,000 Muslims or of their own people, when it's brown on brown, suddenly the left are just fucking mute and they have nothing to say. That is ridiculous. It's inhumane. Okay, and I don't care whether you're on the left or on the right, if you can't have a real conversation about something, you are not ready for the better conversation. So that's going to keep happening. We have to ask ourselves why, right? Why is it that consciousness is so reliably fractured or bifurcated into these two prismatic realities that cannot converge, right? It's because at lower levels of consciousness and higher levels of capture, and where your agency has been co-opted into these groupthink, algorithmic, agitating outrage machines, which we call social media, right? At lower levels of agency, you can't tell the strings that are pulling you, right? And so anyone 2 steps to the right of you is too far right. And anyone 2 steps to the left of you is too far left. And there's no convergence, and there cannot be convergence. And so you can't talk to the masses at the bottom of this pyramid. You can only talk to people in the range that are similarly aligned in some degree of neutrality to you, and similarly armed or how do I want to say this? They have a similar amount of awareness of systems of control and forms of influence, and are trying to safeguard or separate or extricate themselves from that. So we can call that agency or free will, or we can call that consciousness. Now, I don't want to get into a consciousness and free will debate, but I'm saying that not everybody can participate in the same quality of conversation. And yet, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. That is more reason why people of sane mind should pull together and start having a different quality of conversation and figure out what we can actually do. I've got a 4-year-old, right? And when you see kids, because they have these birthday parties, and you see 30 or 40 of them, and they're moggy, they're off their fucking minds, and they're just ripping around, screaming, jumping on things, pulling stuff down. Right. There's no sanity there that we can recognize as adults, but they're having a ripping good time, but they also don't have any understanding of consequence. You can't speak into that field and start suggesting what they do. You have to just show leadership. You also don't have to go and check to see if everybody agrees with you. They're not going to agree. You can't get consensus from toddlers, right? And in the same way, you cannot get consensus from people who are captured, completely captured into the confected dramas, which are now so overwhelming and so pervasive into all areas of our life. Everything is a dysfunctional drama. Corporate life is a dysfunctional drama. Religion, politics, the conversation between the sexes. There isn't a single area of life where there is a bright, shining human light on top of a hill that everybody can go, oh my God, that's the way to follow towards tomorrow. If we keep going that way, things are going to be okay. There isn't such an answer now. But here's the good news, right? You don't even exactly need a majority to engender influence. Let's call it positive influence, because that's certainly our intention. When they were making the movie, The Gladiator, there's a shot where obviously this is CGI, right? Animators created the completed Colosseum and the city of Rome. And in the one shot, there's this flock of birds, starlings or swallows or something, that fly over the rim, and then they circle the Colosseum and then they fly out. And when the animators realized that this is what they were going to have to do, nice to have you here, folks. I've got Tribeca Arts, I've got Kaz in the World, Esoteric Dixie Dharma, I love the name. Carol Erica's here, and a few other people whose names are not popping up. As they shot, we're talking about how to garner coherence in a group of people where there isn't the capacity to just exert leadership, because the problem's too big, the herd is too big. But when these animators were trying to make that movie, they didn't know how they were going to animate 1,000 birds, right? The job was too big. So they got ornithologists in to try and understand the problem. And the ornithologist said to them, don't worry, there's actually some good news here. every single bird inherently has got a simple heuristic with two factors to it. The one factor is the bird doesn't ever want to fly too close to the bird in front of it or next to it, right? So there's that natural tension. And it doesn't want to veer too far away from the bird beside it, right? We're still underneath, in our lowest forms of conscious and awareness, we're still social creatures. We still want to cohere, right? If we pull ourselves away, we pull ourselves away in a form of reluctance because we're sick and tired of what we have to deal with. If we extricate ourselves from relationships or from community or from family, it's not because we love our own company so much and we don't get anything from other people. It's because this is a lesser evil. The solitude is a lesser evil. It hurts us less, it disturbs us less than having to contend with the boorish nature or the noise or the social dysfunction that we are experiencing, or just the lack of depth that we're experiencing in our online communities. So we're still social creatures. And that means that when they animated those birds, all they had to do was animate that heuristic into it. They had to make sure that each bird didn't crash into the bird in front of it and behind it, and it didn't want to veer too far away. And that creates an immediate elasticity. And if you watch, you can go on YouTube and Google the word murmuration, and you will see this flock of starlings moving around in the sky in an organic motion, right? It's way beyond a three-body problem. All of those birds are somehow, and the same happens with schools of fish in the ocean. Every now and again, one bird bumps into the other, but I mean, its natural behavior is to sort of remain in an elastic tension with each other as they move around. And this is the interesting thing. If one of those birds catches a gnat or an insect on the wing, like it just moves for a bit and tries to catch something, or it feels a bit of an updraft, whichever direction it moves, inherently the 10 or 20 birds around it just move with it, right? Just so. And the 100 birds around that 20 all move in concert as well. If a small handful of people on the internet got together in a public speaking platform or a social project, right, and started moving, in inverted commas, moving in a certain way, invariably people watching, without even knowing why they galvanized or attracted, would be drawn to it and would want to follow the movement, right? This is possible. We can, through a murmuration, through that dynamic, actually get together a small nucleus of people and still effect a profound and enormous change that tracks logarithmically. This is possible. This is possible. And we need to understand that this is possible, and we need to believe that this is possible. So if you doubt me, go and understand how herd mentality works, right? Herd mentality doesn't always only stampede towards cliffs. It will go anywhere where it thinks the group is suggesting or implying sanity, safety, sanctuary, or better. And we can use that to our advantage, right? Also, how much personal sanctuary and respite and sanity are you going to enjoy in your life if you know that there are like-minded people who want to have like-minded quality of conversation and also not just talk about things? That at the core of this conversation is this collective intention towards maturity, what better looks like, what sanity looks like. And I want to say something today quickly that I said yesterday as well. Although I can't see how long this video is going for. Something is very strange here today. Normally it tells me how long the video is going for. Anyway, what I wanted to say was there can be no right or no only ways. There can be no right or only ways. Half of the issue in the world is because all the wars are fought over, all the enormous suffering that we're enduring. A large root cause of that is because we're behaving as if there are right or only ways, right? And we just disagree on what those right or only ways are. So there cannot be right or only ways. Human beings are all, the world is relative, our perspectives are relative, our positions that we start from are relative, our degrees of opportunity are all relative and different. There cannot be singular right or only ways. There cannot be. But that doesn't mean there are not better and worse ways. Right. If you look at a triangle, right, and you look at the bottom line of that triangle, people on the extreme left will be convinced that this is the right or the only way. And people on the extreme right will be convinced that this is the right or the only way. And they're pulling apart from each other, right? And there's no center and nothing can cohere. And eventually it's either going to end in war or it's going to end in schism, right? But unfortunately, in our world today, there is nowhere left to schism to. We've filled the globe up, right? We've used all the resources. Every country's got a name. The only place to go now is back in on ourselves and start predating on ourselves, or start breaking the map up again into factions, right? We're going to keep doing that as human beings, and it's not going to go anywhere pretty. So even though there's no right or only way, there is still a better way. There is still a better way. And let's say the better way in this sense is the tent pole that's keeping the whole tent up. Yeah. If you pull too far to the left or too far to the right, the tent is going to collapse. Our social structure will collapse. And better means keeping the tent pole up. It means that in the case of any intractable dichotomy, any intractable paradox, any disagreement that threatens to turn to collapse or violence, in the instance of any binary objection, we have to assume that there is a third transcendent perspective, a place, something that is more salient, closer to a higher order of truth, in which these two naturally reconcile. Now, this is just a fact of reality. The world happens to work like that. We just haven't gotten on to that because we're still stuck in a previous threshold that we are now moving through collectively and socially, and that threshold is binary thinking. It is the reason why our consciousness schisms automatically into two prismatic opposites. It is the reason why our default operating system is still running on a us versus them, a tribal heuristic, right? That is a very, very, very old piece of software that has carried us up until this point, that cannot carry us beyond this point. And that is precisely the boundary that we need to evolve past. And this boundary is not a natural evolution like all of our other evolutions were. This has to be an evolution of choice. We have to choose what discernment looks like so that we can determine, each individual and collectively can determine, that even though there's no right or only way, there's still a transcendent perspective, and I'm still going to go look for that. That is a choice. That is always going to be a choice, right? And in order to make such a choice, one has to be a psychological adult. One has to hold oneself accountable for one's choices to a degree. And one has to hold oneself equally responsible for the civic structure, right? All of that is talking about a degree of maturity and a degree of agency and a degree of sovereignty and consciousness and awareness, right? And the delta between what that looks like and where most people are is the exact shape of our problem. Now, in any society, there's going to be people who are better disposed towards that and less disposed towards that. Right now, we have an enormous population distribution and only a very, very tiny amount of people who can think and operate like that. And this invitation is to those people and to people who resonate with that and have an intentionality in themselves to upgrade and steer themselves towards that kind of competency, or who at least have the maturity to recognize that people with that competency are the kind of people that you'd like to listen to more, right? We need civic philosophers guiding us. We need storytellers, bards, artists aligned to that idea that are contributing to this conversation. We need such people, right? But we don't even know how to attract and aggregate such people in one place. And the handful of us here are still wondering whether this is worthwhile doing, whether this is possible, whether, I don't know, but it's necessary. And that's why I'm trying to do something, because we can't talk forever. We can't dither forever. There's going to be 1,000 objections that can shoot the legs out from this, but it doesn't change the necessity of what I'm talking about. And we've got a polycrisis that's getting worse. Our circumstance is getting worse. None of this is getting any better. Yeah. And we absolutely do need to do something. And the thing that we need to do is definitely not catharsis and violence. Now, I'm not seeing the comments. Here we go. Good thoughts, Rocker. But the barrier is worse than he person not likely reaching educated sentience. I'm not talking about educated sentience. I'm talking about initiated awareness of our interdependence and our interdependence with our ecosystem. So for the longest period of time, uneducated humans by our modern standards, I'm talking for tens of thousands of years, the normal worldview, the normative worldview on this planet for human beings was animistic. It was an idea that we lived in an ensouled environment. Ensouled, in other words, we lived in relationship with intelligence and forms of consciousness that were perhaps non-human, but were nevertheless worth being aware of and acting as if we are in relationship with that and dependent to the quality of that relationship. That is normative consciousness. It's normative consciousness to be aware of your environment and realize that you're an integral part of that environment, socially, ecologically, economically, and in many other ways. That does not require vaunted sentience or vaunted education. That requires initiation. And that used to be an institution that safeguarded humanity's survival through all of the obstacles, survival obstacles that they lived for tens of thousands of years. And it's the one thing that we've lost in our humanist excursion into enlightenment and scientific enlightenment and reductionism. I'm not suggesting we throw away scientific reductionism and all of the gifts of science. I'm saying that is an incomplete conversation. It's half of a whole conversation. And if you follow the work of Ian McGilchrist, he's for all accounts a scientist, right? He's talking about neuroscience and psychiatry and how the brain works. And his observation is our understanding of the difference between the left and the right brain is so cartoonishly inaccurate. Yeah, we still have these little pictures where this is all about numbers and this is about imagination and color. And he took a decade, right, proving that that's wrong and illuminating what the two hemispheres of the brain actually do. The left hemisphere of the brain is egoic. It sees itself as the only self and everything else as objective, as objects that can be squandered, objects that can be, it's either a thing that for me to have or it's an other that I need to defend myself against. Yeah, that's going to come and steal my lunch. And it sees everything like that. And the right brain is the one that is pattern aware, ambient aware. It sees self as an integral part of a relationship with everything else that's going on. It's a natural way of seeing things. The animist reality or the animist consciousness, the right brain is dominant. In our modern culture, left brain is dominant. And the problem is when the right brain is dominant, it still uses the left brain for tool making and for problem solving, but the left brain works for the right brain. The left brain is not capable of leading. The fact that our world is enormously dysfunctional at the moment and headed to a very dark dystopian place. There's no bright future on our horizon. It's dark and uncertain. And you can know this because what we're missing is leadership. And what we're missing is respect for humanity. You can just intuit that, right? The book that he wrote is called The Master and the Emissary. And the point is the emissary has usurped the master and thinks now it is the master and it is running this unholy mess. And I have a way of saying it that says that's an illness. It's an illness when the left brain subsumes the leadership over the right brain. We lose our relationship and our connection with our environment and our ecosystem and our relationships. It's a pathology, right? And we have a mass pathology. And I said we made of the illness, that illness, we made of the illness a dungeon, and within that dungeon we imprison and torture the cure. And the cure is, of course, our imagination, our imaginal self, our sense of mythic and mythopoetic, our sensibility that would regard animism as normative rather than something fantastical that primitive people do in huts out in the bush. We've got this so ass backwards, right? And there's no reason why we can't have sophisticated, intelligent, grounded conversations about these things. These things do not need to be whimsical or fantastical. And I hope what you can hear, and I'm struggling for some feedback here, and also the screen looks different today, and I don't know exactly what's going on. But I hope what you can hear is that there's not a singular thread. We're trying to thread a needle through many avenues of necessary conversation. There's so many ways to slice and dice this, because there are so many ways to slice and dice this, and there's not a single or an only way. Now, there's better ways and worse ways to have all of these conversations, or to not have them at all, or to avoid them, or to bicker down in the weeds about some irrelevant minutiae, right? They are also, in the same way that there are no right or only ways, but there's better and worse, there are less and more salient things. And we want to start identifying what is more salient. Here's a closing idea I'll leave you all with. Even though there's no right or wrong, good or bad, this or that, yes or no, there is still such a thing as beneficial and maleficial. There are still things that you can do in your life, or human beings can do collectively, that are going to end up regarded as beneficial. Beneficial to what? Beneficial for our future flourishing, beneficial for our arc of meaning, beneficial for legacy, beneficial for the prospects of the future human. So let's call that beneficial conceptually for now. Maleficial is anything that detracts from or impinges on that. And right now, if we look at every single form of economics, social organization, aged care, education, the banking system, how people afford houses, how they are dating and finding love online, how they're raising their children, how to know what to eat. Yeah. Every single thing that we're doing is pathologically maleficial. It's the opposite of what we would want if we wanted to get to a better place. This is the conversation we need to be having, and such conversations. I'm not the only one who can say such things, right? There are people out there, but the problem is he's building his platform and so-and-so's building theirs, and this one's talking about that one. They're selling a course. Oh my God, like, fucking read the room, guys. The only way humans get through this now is is pulling together. It is because pulling together is beneficial and pulling apart is maleficial. Yeah. So if there's any questions, I would love to field them. As I said, this interface is different today, and I can't figure out what's going on. If nobody has anything to say or any comments, maybe just do me a favor and like or share or perform some sort of electronic engagement here, not because I need the validation, but because if you don't do that, nothing in Substack is going to encourage other people to come and listen to me speaking for longer than 15 seconds without little digital tinsel capturing their magpie engagement. So help me to help other people. Somebody wrote an essay here. Awareness sufficient to be James. I'm not going to be able to get through. That's the roadblock. So James says the roadblock is that every infant human starts as a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa is Latin for a blank slate. I disagree with that, actually. No human human brings into the world any experiences and any improved learned wisdom of mature humans have. That's true, but that doesn't mean they don't bring an intentionality into the world. I'm going to say something about that right now. There is a myth called the tabula rasa, that every single human being arrives here as a blank slate. And the implication is, and you've been told this and it's a lie, is that you can become anything that you want to be, which means if you cannot become that thing, somehow the failure to do so is on you. And it's not so. Every single one of us seems to arrive here, and I've watched this with children that I've raised, and I've watched this with friends and siblings, and in well over hundreds of patients, right, and clients that have come to me and had the same conversation. People arrive here with I don't have better language for it, so let's just borrow language from that world and call it a soul contract. There's something that they want to be. There's something that they want to, that they find more appealing than their siblings. Not all of that is nurture. Some of it is inherent, and you can't even call it nature because it's not always tied to DNA. But the implication, the story of it, I find very useful. Here's the story. The story is the soul comes into the world, and the spirit comes along with it and says, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" And it says, "I'm finding that interesting. I want to go and see what it's all about. And I'm attracted to here, and I've got some gift to bring into the world, and I've got some like itch that I want to scratch here in this experience." But birth itself is the moment of forgetfulness where that is all forgotten, and we get placed into families. And in order to get our needs met, we have to let go painfully of that intentionality which we arrive with, because we don't have the agency and we don't have the means. And in modern society, in societies where initiation is a thing, there is an inherent recognition in that capacity that people arrive with, that giftedness. So it was called the genius loci, the genius that is already there. It was called the daimon in Greek. It was called the genius in Latin. Cultures have names for these things. And it's this form of relating to understanding, and the form of relating to the world, and the form of responding to challenges and invitations that's unique to each person, that isn't only a function of their nurture or their family. And in societies where initiation is no longer present, our families, in order to try and help us, educate or condition that out of us and impress the social normative social agreement onto us. And there is our first major wounding. And people who have to find themselves or heal through different kinds of psychological discomfort are precisely learning how to unvelcro, pull the velcro of that conditioning and that form of morality and social acceptance. And how do I belong? I belong by following the script, and yet my heart and my soul wants to do another thing. That story of the tabula rasa says we each arrive here as a blank slate, and because we're a blank slate, we can choose. You can be anything you want to be, and then in our failure to be anything we want to be, like when we have to divorce because our marriages are dysfunctional. I wanted to be a happily married man, so the failure of me being a happily married man is all on me. And the failure for me not being good at work, or not getting the promotion, or not finding love, or not being a great artist, whatever it is that are breaking the hearts of young people at the moment, and young people of all ages, whatever is breaking their heart at the moment is the failure of the world to live up to that unreal expectation. Because we cannot be anything we want to be, but we can be more ourselves. We can pursue our desires. We can pursue our intentionality. And there's a thing that I wrote that I want to share with you, and I'll leave you with this. It's a little piece called Become. And it goes like this. It says, "Become the shelter you were once forced to abandon as a child. Become the shelter you were once forced to abandon as a child. Become the leader you would follow out of love. Become the light you seek, drawn to like a moth. Become the example of what you appreciate so in others. Be the unfolding gift. Be the unfolding gift that you came here to share. Become the invitation and the welcome that you were denied by life. Be the unfolding gift you came here to share. Become the invitation and the welcome that you were denied by life. Become the fulfillment of your heart's desire. Become the realization of your dreams. Become. Now, that is a far worthier cause for a human to invest himself in than all of the shoulds and coulds and shalts and should nots that we are constrained by in our modern operating system. And I think it's time we challenge all of that. Folks, thank you very much for sticking around for this this meandering ramble. And I will try and figure out if this technology has not done me a dirty. And I will answer your question with some more space, James, and get back to you. And I'll try and be here tomorrow to keep the momentum going. But thank you very much. Take care and have a lovely day.